This is the only weight I've got left to carry.
Thanksgiving was meant to bring peace, but as I sat at the end of our crowded table watching my wife Cassandra giggle with her friend Harriet, I felt no thanks at all. The house carried the scent of roasted turkey and sweet apple pie, mixed with the soft clatter of glasses and voices from family and guests. The table was trimmed with golden leaves, flickering candles casting warm light, a picture of comfort. Then Cassandra spoke. "Nothing to be thankful for in bed," she shouted, loud enough for everyone to catch it. Harriet nearly spilled her wine before breaking into wild laughter. The others froze for a moment, their silence heavier than words, until Adam, her brother, cleared his throat in discomfort. Cassandra smirked, thrilled with her joke at my cost. I had learned to live with her barbs, the way she loved making me her target in front of others, but this time was sharper. This wasn't a careless slip in private, the kind I could ignore. No, she wanted an audience. She wanted the show. And the sting was knowing everyone's eyes were waiting to see my reaction. I set my glass down slow, my jaw tight, fingers pressing against the stem. I forced out a thin smirk that didn't reach my eyes, the mask I had practiced to keep calm and avoid messy fights in front of company. But inside, I was burning. The table's laughter came soft and strained, unsure if it was safe to join in. Harriet nudged her playfully. "Come on, Cass, cut him some slack. Maybe it's just a rough season." More chuckles, more glances, more weight pressing against my chest. My fists curled beneath the table where no one could see. I told myself to let it go, like always. Nod, smile, pretend it didn't cut. Pretend it wasn't another in a long line of cheap jabs she loved throwing at me. But something in me snapped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pound the table or demand an apology. That wasn't me. Instead, I lifted my glass, sipped, and locked my eyes on hers. Cassandra's grin faltered. She had expected me to laugh, to shrug, to slip into the role of the weak husband she'd shaped me into. But I didn't. I let the silence breathe between us, my gaze steady, my smirk firm. And in that pause, I made my choice. I wasn't letting this pass. Not tonight. The rest of the meal, I stayed quiet. Adam rambled about football. I nodded along, even forced a weak laugh at one of his dull jokes. But my mind stayed on Cassandra's words, replaying her tone, her smug grin, the way she soaked in the laughter that followed. I caught myself watching her through the night, seeing her laugh and drink as if nothing had happened, while a storm churned inside me. She thought it was just another jab, another careless line that would vanish like all the rest. But she was wrong. When dessert was served, I barely touched my plate. Harriet kept cracking jokes, Cassandra sipped her wine, and the rest of the table pretended not to notice the shift in my mood. Maybe they thought I was simply tired. Maybe they assumed I'd laugh it off like I always did. But I wasn't tired. I was done. When the last dishes were cleared and guests began leaving, I stood near the door thanking them for coming. Cassandra was still lively, hugging Harriet and laughing as if the night had been perfect. Adam clapped my shoulder before he left, his expression hard to read, but his tone quiet. He knew something was wrong, even if he didn't know the whole story. "See you later, man," he said. I gave him a thin smile. When the house finally emptied, Cassandra stretched with a sigh of satisfaction. "That went well. Harriet was hilarious tonight." I didn't respond. I walked into the dining room and began stacking plates. My movements were slow, deliberate, my head full. She had no idea that tonight had changed something, that I was finished playing along. The house was heavy now, the silence broken only by the hum of the dishwasher and the faint hiss of dying candles. I carried plates into the kitchen, moving carefully, holding myself steady even as anger stirred beneath my skin. Across the room, Cassandra hummed while wiping down the counters, looking proud of herself like she had just put on a flawless show. Her words echoed in my mind. Nothing to be thankful for in bed, tossed out so casually, with no thought at all. Like I was nothing. Harriet's burst of laughter had made it sting even more. And now Cassandra carried on, humming, smiling, as if she hadn't cut me down in front of everyone. I drew a slow breath, weighing how to handle it. I wasn't the kind of man who shouted or slammed doors. I avoided messy fights and pointless drama. But tonight was different. The way she had laughed at me with no regard for how it landed flipped a switch inside me. For the first time in years, I couldn't just let it pass. I set a plate down with more force than I meant to. The sharp clatter finally made Cassandra glance up in surprise. "You okay?" she asked. I turned slowly, resting my hands on the sink. "Do you even realize what you said tonight?" Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "At dinner," I said, keeping my voice firm. "That comment about having nothing to be thankful for in bed." She rolled her eyes and gave a short laugh. "Oh, that? Mark, it was just a joke." There it was again, the same dismissive tone, the same brush-off. My feelings treated like nothing more than an inconvenience. I let out a slow breath. A joke at my expense, in front of everyone. She sighed, sounding already bored. "You're being too sensitive. It wasn't serious." I studied her face, the ease with which she dismissed it. "You do this a lot," I said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Turn me into the punchline." Cassandra groaned. "Oh my God, Mark, really? People laughed. It's not a big deal." I didn't look away. "It is to me." That made her pause, not because she suddenly understood, but because she hadn't expected me to push back. Normally I'd drop it by now, shake my head, tell myself it wasn't worth the argument, and let her get away with it. Not tonight. She let out an exasperated sigh. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it. Harriet and I were just messing around. You know how we are." I tilted my head slightly. "Yeah, I do." I saw the flicker of annoyance cross her face. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know how you are." My voice was level, but there was an edge underneath. "I know how you like to get laughs at my expense, how you take little digs in front of an audience because you think it's funny, because you think it doesn't matter." I exhaled slowly. "But it does matter, Cassandra. It matters to me." She stared at me for a long moment, then instead of acknowledging anything, she scoffed. "God, you are really blowing this out of proportion." I nodded slowly. Right, because of course that was her reaction. It always was. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head, how she was already preparing to make me the problem, how she'd twist this into me being too sensitive, me not being able to take a joke, me making a big deal out of nothing. But she wasn't going to win this one. I pushed off the counter, turning to load the dishwasher. I wouldn't argue with her. I wouldn't explain myself again, and that's what made her nervous. She hated when I stopped reacting, when I shut down instead of engaging in her little back and forths. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, watching me with narrowed eyes. "Oh, come on. Don't do that thing where you act all broody and silent. Just say what you need to say." I didn't look at her. I already did. Silence stretched between us. She was waiting for me to crack, to roll my eyes and move on. But I didn't. Instead, I wiped my hands and turned to leave the kitchen. "Mark!" she called after me. I didn't stop because I wasn't interested in another argument where she played the same tired game. I wasn't interested in another night of pretending everything was fine. As I walked upstairs, a strange sense of clarity settled over me. I wasn't just angry. I was done. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Cassandra dictate how I felt anymore. I wasn't going to keep letting her belittle me under the guise of humor. And if she couldn't respect me, then maybe it was time I started respecting myself. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. The house was still dark when I woke up at 5:12 a.m., the kind of time where everything outside felt untouched, waiting. Cassandra was still asleep beside me, her breath slow and even. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the night before. The sharp edge of her words still lingered in my chest, but something was different this time. I wasn't just angry, I was motivated. I slipped out of bed carefully, not bothering to turn on the light. I moved through the familiar darkness of our bedroom, pulling on sweatpants and an old hoodie. Normally, I'd start my morning the same way, groggily scrolling through my phone, sipping coffee, and letting the day roll over me like I was a passenger in my own life. But not today. Today I had a plan. I grabbed my car keys and stepped outside, the early morning chill biting at my skin. The sky was still ink black, the streets empty except for a few porch lights flickering in the distance. It had been years since I'd done this. Left the house before sunrise with an actual purpose. 15 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour gym I hadn't stepped foot in for years. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the cold air. I used to come here all the time, back when I felt like me, back when I had control over my own life. Somewhere along the way, I'd let that slip, let myself fall into a pattern of just existing instead of living. I wasn't going to be that guy anymore. The gym was nearly empty, save for a few dedicated early risers. The scent of rubber mats and faint disinfectant filled the air. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something shift in me, an old memory waking up. I used to love this, the challenge, the discipline, the feeling of pushing myself past limits. I approached the front desk where a guy in his early 20s barely looked up from his phone. "You a member?" he asked. "I used to be," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Minutes later, I was holding a fresh membership card, and for the first time in years, I actually felt in control of something. I started slow on the treadmill, easing myself into the rhythm of my own footsteps. The belt hummed beneath me as I pushed forward, my lungs burning with the reminder that I hadn't done this in a long time. But with each step, I felt something old and familiar returning, the version of myself I'd lost along the way. After the treadmill, I moved to the weights. My muscles trembled as I gripped the dumbbells, the weight heavier than I remembered, but I pushed through it. Every rep felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself Cassandra had chipped away over the years. I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about me. Halfway through my workout, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mark?" I turned, sweat dripping down my temple, and saw Troy standing near the benches. Troy and I used to work together years ago before he switched jobs. He'd always been one of those guys who stayed disciplined, fit, motivated, and looking at him now, I could tell he hadn't let himself slip like I had. "Man, it's been a while," he said, clapping me on the back. I nodded, catching my breath. "Yeah, trying to get back into it." Troy smirked. "Good. You look like you needed this." I laughed, shaking my head. "You have no idea." We fell into conversation easily. He asked about work, I asked about his family, and somehow the conversation veered toward the real reason I was here. "She still got you on a leash?" he asked, only half joking. I exhaled, rubbing the back of my neck. "Not for long." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "That bad?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stared at the barbell in front of me, feeling the weight of everything Cassandra had said over the years. Everything she'd done. Finally, I met his eyes. I let myself fade. And I'm done doing that. Troy studied me for a moment before nodding. "Then stop talking about it and do something." I grinned. "That's the plan." By the time I finished my workout, my muscles ached in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was a good ache, the kind that reminded me I was alive, that I was capable of something more. I drove home just as the sun was rising, a golden glow stretching across the sky. The house was still quiet when I stepped inside. Cassandra wasn't up yet. Good. I took a long shower, letting the water wash away the sweat, the exhaustion, the old version of myself I was leaving behind. When I stepped out, I didn't feel drained. I felt recharged for the first time in a long time. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I recognized. Someone I was proud of. By the time Cassandra finally woke up, I was already dressed, sipping coffee at the kitchen counter. She walked in, still groggy, stretching as she grabbed a mug. She glanced at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "You're up early," she said. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Yeah." She eyed my gym bag, the slight sheen of sweat still on my skin. "Did you go somewhere?" I met her gaze, taking my time before answering. "Yeah," I said simply. "I did." She waited, expecting me to elaborate, to explain myself like I always did, but I didn't. I just took another sip of coffee and picked up my phone, scrolling through emails. Cassandra frowned, but didn't press it. Not yet. But I saw the wheels turning in her head. She was used to being the one in control, dictating the tone of our conversations, our lives. She wasn't going to like this new version of me. And honestly, I didn't care. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't living for Cassandra. I was living for me. At work that day, I felt different. Lighter in a way. Not physically. My muscles still burned from the workout, reminding me how far I had to go. But mentally, it was like a switch had flipped inside me. For years, I'd moved through my days on autopilot, just existing, waiting for the next sarcastic remark, the next eye roll, the next moment where Cassandra reminded me that I wasn't enough. But not today. Today, I had a plan. My coworker Jake leaned against my desk with a knowing smirk. "You look different," he said. When I asked how, he said I looked more awake, that he didn't see me at lunch yesterday, and figured I was buried under Cassandra's latest to-do list. I told him I had other things to do, and he noted I almost sounded like a man with a life outside his wife. "Maybe I am," I said. This pattern continued over the following weeks. I'd work out religiously, come home later than usual, not ridiculously late, just late enough to get under her skin. Late enough that I didn't text updates about where I was or when I'd be home. I met up with guys from the gym for drinks, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't about the drinks or company. It was about reclaiming my time, my choices, my independence. And Cassandra hated it. She'd be waiting when I got home, pretending she wasn't, scrolling through her phone but clearly itching for confrontation. When she'd ask where I'd been, I'd simply say, out. When she'd press for details, I'd shrug and say I grabbed drinks with guys from the gym. She hated that answer. Not because she actually cared where I was, but because I hadn't felt the need to run it by her first. One evening, she was waiting at the kitchen table with wine when I got home, her expression unreadable. "What's up?" I asked, and she said I should tell her, that I'd been different and it was sudden. I told her maybe it wasn't sudden, maybe she just never noticed before because she didn't care enough to see it. During our confrontation, she'd get more frustrated, asking what was going on with me, saying I was acting different, barely talking to her. I'd ask if that wasn't what she wanted, reminding her how she'd spent years making me the punchline of every conversation, treating me like a joke in front of her friends. She'd get defensive, say that wasn't fair, but I'd challenge her. If I had made a comment like that about her at Thanksgiving, how would she have reacted? Silence. She knew exactly how she would have reacted. Furiously. She would have been livid, would have demanded an apology, stewed in resentment for days or weeks. But when it was me, it was just a joke. I told her I had a problem with how she treated me, with the way she talked about me when other people were around, with the fact that she only cared now because she felt like she was losing control. She tried to argue, but I cut her off, telling her the truth that had been building inside me. I was never your husband. I was just your favorite punchline. The words landed like a slap. Her face paled slightly, her lips parting as if she wanted to respond, but what could she say? I'd spent years brushing off her jabs, swallowing my pride, telling myself it wasn't worth fighting over. But the truth was, I'd been miserable. And the moment I stopped catering to her, the moment I stopped playing along, she started to panic because deep down she knew she'd pushed me too far. She just never thought I'd actually do something about it. When I grabbed my gym bag again and she asked where I was going, I simply said, out again. And when she tried to stop me, I told her to watch me walk out that door. I spent the night at Troy's, talking about how I'd been done for a while, but hadn't wanted to admit it to myself. When I finally got home later that night, Cassandra was waiting at the kitchen table with wine, looking nervous, really nervous, for the first time in our marriage. We had our real conversation then. I told her I saw a woman who'd spent years belittling her husband in front of other people, laughing at his expense, dismissing his feelings whenever he tried to bring them up, only caring now because she could feel me pulling away. I asked if she'd even be sitting there if I hadn't started changing, or would she still be joking with Harriet about what a joke her husband was? Long, heavy silence. She had no answer because she knew the truth. I told her I didn't hate her, but I was done living like this. When she asked if that was it, I said yeah. She said fine, and walked upstairs, but I could see the panic in her eyes for the first time. Over the following weeks, the shift in our house was almost tangible, like a change in temperature. Cassandra tried everything. She cooked my favorite meals, lit candles, tried acting normal, even seemed genuinely scared of losing me for the first time. But it was too late. The love I'd once felt had been worn down by years of being dismissed, humiliated, and overlooked. I'd spent so much time trying to make our marriage work that I hadn't realized how one-sided that effort had been. She'd watch me as I came home from the gym, as I took work calls with confidence I hadn't had in years, as I stopped orbiting her world and built one of my own. I could see the regret in her eyes, the realization that she'd let me slip away, and now it was too late to bring me back. Finally, one Saturday morning, while she sat staring into her coffee cup, I told her I thought we should separate. Her head snapped up so fast I thought she might get whiplash, her eyes widening, face going pale. She tried to minimize it as just a few arguments or blame it all on that stupid Thanksgiving comment. But I explained this wasn't about arguments. It was about years of disrespect she'd never acknowledged. She asked what exactly she'd endured in our marriage that made her the sufferer. But she hesitated because she didn't have an answer. Not one that would erase the fact that I was the one who'd been disrespected, dismissed, treated like a joke. She asked if there was anything she could have done differently. You could have listened a long time ago, I said. 2 weeks later, I signed a lease for my own apartment. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was mine. The night before I left, she stood in our bedroom doorway asking if that was really it. I said yeah. She said she never thought it would end like this, and I told her neither did I. Then I picked up my bag, walked past her, and didn't look back. The version of me who would have stayed, who would have kept tolerating her treatment, who would have continued being her punchline, he didn't exist anymore. For the first time in years, I felt free.